Hello everyone, I am of mixed Chinese and Korean descent, born in North Korea. In the previous episode, I briefly introduced North Korea. Today, I want to introduce myself and talk about how I was born in North Korea. During World War II, East Asia was in chaos, and nobody cared about border crossings. In fact, the Korean Chinese people were early immigrants from that time, mostly from northeast China and Shandong province, who traveled a bit further to the Korean peninsula. In 1943, my grandfather followed his uncle to North Korea. He was 11 years old then, and at that time, the Korean peninsula was still one country. My grandfather took a boat to Incheon and opened a Chinese restaurant in what was then called Hanseong, now known as Seoul, which was still a small city back then. According to my grandfather, Japanese people were the first-class citizens on the Korean peninsula, Koreans were second-class, and Chinese people living in Korea were third-class. After enduring the Japanese colonial period, the Korean War broke out. My grandfather left Korea, and his uncle closed the Chinese restaurant and took up odd jobs to make a living. After the war ended, due to the close relationship between China and North Korea, almost all Chinese expatriates in the South migrated to North Korea to continue their lives. My grandfather wasn't doing well in China. He married but had no children. Upon hearing news from his uncle in North Korea, he decided to go to North Korea with my grandmother. My grandfather was 25 and my grandmother was 17 at that time. Upon entering North Korea, my grandfather easily found his uncle in Pyongyang, and they moved north to a small city to start their second business venture. According to my father, their culinary skills were quite ordinary in China and didn't earn much, but in North Korea, people were quite willing to try exotic foods. After the armistice between the North and South, Chinese people in North Korea received much better treatment than other nationals, even getting extra government supplies. However, even though the overseas Chinese were still Chinese citizens, returning to China was restricted. The good news was that my father was born in 1962. Later, due to a period of cold relations between China and North Korea, those wanting to stay in North Korea had to voluntarily give up their Chinese citizenship. My grandfather did not sign the papers. As time went on, the supply system collapsed, and resources in North Korea were prioritized for the military and government, making life increasingly difficult for ordinary people, whether Korean or Chinese. Smart Chinese people began engaging in cross-border trade, known as selling colors. They would split large packets of hot dye into smaller ones to trade in North Korea for other goods, exchange North Korean medicinal materials in China, and bring Chinese furniture to trade in North Korea. Many people engaged in large-scale trade, with some teams having over 50 members. My grandparents, having lived in North Korea for a long time and learned Korean, also participated and made more money than running a restaurant. They would spend half their time in China procuring goods. Despite this, my father didn't fall in love with a Chinese girl. He met my mother, an ordinary woman from Pyongyang, in 1985. They got married, and later my sisters were born. I have two sisters who were born in Dandong, China, while I was born in Pyongyang in 1995. Although my parents did business in both China and North Korea, we all knew that compared to China, North Korea was not a more suitable place for living, studying, and working. So I went to school in China and only visited North Korea during holidays and family visits. However, if you asked me which I prefer, China or North Korea, I would say North Korea. In China, you have to think about many things, just like you watching this video. Even though you can watch it on a PC or phone in a bright, spacious house, think back to the last time you felt anxious about life. If you asked a North Korean, they might answer, "I can't remember, it's been too long." Of course, it's not that North Koreans have everything, but rather that they have nothing. They don't have the opportunity to get things without hard work, so they don't need to strive as much. For most North Koreans, whether you do well or not, everyone gets about the same. You can't feel this if you just visit for a few days. Even though news reports make North Koreans' behavior seem exaggerated and incomprehensible, if you are willing, I will introduce North Korea in more detail in my future videos, giving an objective and in-depth perspective from my first-hand experience. That's all for this video. Please subscribe and be patient for more stories from me.